Hi, I'm Teresa Sims, and I am a transformation life coach, an award-winning author, a speaker, and a podcast host. What I love to do in my business is to help individuals who have gone through near-death experiences like I have, who have experienced the other side of trauma in life, and how to help them to recover and find some normalcy back in their lives for themselves to enjoy life once again. Because I've had two near-death experiences in my life, today we thought we would talk about actually both of them. So I'd like to start with the first one. So as I was growing up as a child, I grew up in a home that was filled with violence and mental instability. My father was a violent alcoholic and had been an alcoholic for many, many years, as he was quite an abused child when he was growing up. And the mother figure that I had, she was very unstable. She had many emotional issues, mental illness, and it made life really challenging. But I also had a sibling who was one of my tormentors and one of my main abusers. So for me, growing up in that home, there wasn't too many days that went by where I wasn't beaten or abused or punished in some obscene way that was horrible. And my abuse started at the age of 5. So by the time I was 14, I had started drinking heavily. You're a product of your environment sometimes. And I was watching the father, consume his alcohol, and it seemed to numb his pain. So that's what I chose to do. But what I didn't really understand was why they had put me on antidepressants and medication to try to calm me down. They felt I was depressed. They always felt I was a bit of a problem. Their way of dealing with me was to put me on medication. And from that point on, my life just spiraled down because by the age of 19, I was mixing alcohol with this prescriptive medication, and it was just a recipe for disaster. One night in particular, when I was 19 years old, things had just stockpiled and I was so overwhelmed with everything. I couldn't find my way out of what I was dealing with, the abuse, the trauma, the stress, the anxiety, everything. So I began drinking heavily that day and then was mixing the tranquilizers and prescriptive antidepressants with the alcohol, and decided that that was my night. I was actually going to end my life and I was going to get behind the wheel of my father's car. And that's exactly what I did. I got behind the car. I didn't feel like I had been drinking all day. Nothing was numbing what I was feeling. Nothing was taking away the pain of my life. And it was my time to end it. And I would do it on my terms. So again, behind the wheel of the car, I knew of a specific tree that I was heading for. It was a massive, massive 4 or 5 foot around maple tree that I knew because I had ridden my bicycle out that way and many times, and that was my tree. It spoke to me every time I went by it. So that's where I headed. And it was interesting, just as I am approaching that road, and this was out in the country, as I was approaching that road, tears started to stream down my eyes. And I don't know why, because I don't remember actually wanting to cry or feeling the need to cry. However, my face was soaking wet from tears, and I'm driving towards this tree. And a few moments before things got really unusual, I just felt this calm, this peace wash over me. And then I turned the car towards the tree. So as my tires were hitting the gravel, just before I hit the gravel, a calm peace washed over my body. And to me, that told me that this was the right thing for me to do, that I was going on to a better spot, a better place where all of this abuse and violence wasn't taking place. Seconds after hitting the gravel with my front tires, it was just, the tree was imminent. It was not too far away. But I was stunned and shocked and just completely beside myself with what I had felt had happened within that car. As the tires hit the gravel, the car was suddenly, the steering wheel, you've got this death grip on the steering wheel, as I call it. and it's imminent. But as I'm aiming towards the tree and nothing else is on my mind, as I say, the peace washed over. And then all of a sudden, the steering wheel was just turned violently out of my hands. And before I realized what had happened, the car was actually back on the road and it had stopped. And I was so shocked because as I heard, as I was pulling the car pulled back onto the road, I heard in the car, I heard the words, "You're not finished here yet." And I was, tears running down my face. I couldn't understand what was happening. I had intended to hit that tree. My life was going to be over, and I was fine with that. But here I am being told that I'm not done here. And I couldn't understand why. And I didn't understand at the time why I was hearing voices. I thought I'm losing my mind, to the point where I actually turned all the lights on in the car. All the interior lights went on, and I'm looking around the car because I honestly heard a voice. Didn't know where the voice came from. I didn't know whose voice it was. But hearing those words, it wasn't just spoke to my mind. It wasn't just spoken to my ears. It was almost knitted within my DNA that I wasn't done here yet, that my job on this planet wasn't finished. I had no idea what that was supposed to mean, what it was supposed to look like. And I don't understand what went on after that. I know I had gone home, walked in the house, no one spoke to me. I went to bed and I slept the best sleep I had had in a long time. And I couldn't understand what those words meant to me. So it was an unusual feeling of being trapped in a body that doesn't want to be here, but yet knowing that you're here for so much more. My question was, how do I find that? I must have been searching for a very, very long time after that to try to figure out what that message meant to me. It took a very long time before I discovered what it was. The second near-death experience I had was in 2007, and it was a really snowy, fearfully blustery day in February. And I was gone to work that day. I had just gotten my career going in human resources, and I was having a good time doing that. I had been remarried for 8 months, and I found actually life was so worth living because of everything that was exciting and new and happening in my life. And, I had the career I wanted. I was happily married. Things were going along extremely well. But this February day in 2007, I had gone to work. And when I came out of work that day, I was faced with a blinding ice and snowstorm. It was a terrible squall that had just landed over our city, and it was only in sections of the city, but it was pretty bad. And I drove a Dodge Ram 1500, so it had a Hemi in it, yes, but I was from the farm, so I'm a farm girl. I know how to drive trucks. I know how to be safe on the road. I was fine, and I figured I could just, because of the ice, I would take a different route home that day, because my main route to and from work and home was straight through the city. It was nothing but stoplights, and in that ice, I was not prepared to take that chance. So I decided to skirt around the city that day. It turns out that going that route around the city was one of my biggest mistakes, and it was actually almost my fatal mistake. I was driving and watching the snow. I was watching everyone that was driving on the road with us. There wasn't that much traffic until we got closer into the city. But the vehicle in front of me, the vehicle behind me, we were keeping our distance. We were experienced drivers. It felt that way. And I was very confident in my abilities. What I was not expecting was another driver to come towards me and totally lose control of the vehicle. And that's actually what I faced that day. As I'm getting closer to the city and getting more into traffic, I noticed that another pickup truck coming in my direction was starting to lose control. And it was a Chevy pickup truck, so another truck um, that actually had no weight in the back of their box in the truck. So that's one thing. And I don't know about snow tires, and that's not the issue. But this other vehicle, I watched it and I was kind of mesmerized by it because I was expecting something. You know how when you get that feeling that something incredible or ominous is about to happen, you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach that something is about to occur, but you don't know what. So I'm watching this driver and slowing my vehicle down. The people in front of me and behind me, we were all keeping pace. We were keeping our safe distance from one another. And it just got to the point where as this vehicle got closer, I decided to stop my truck in my lane on the road, and the person in front of me did the same. It was a minivan. The fellow behind me was in a car. He actually stopped a safe distance from me. We were all good. What we weren't expecting, though, was this person to completely lose control of their vehicle. This truck, as we were watching it, it would go off the road into the gravel. It would hit the ice, come back onto the road, spin. Oh, it was so amazing. You know, you watch these things playing out in front of you, and the fear starts to build. The panic starts to bubble up inside your stomach, and you can just feel it, like, you know, when you have heartburn. That's what that panic feeling felt like. It was something that was rising up and it was consuming everything in my body. It was just unbelievable, and nothing had happened yet. You know, I'm watching this truck often on the road, spinning around, trying to gain control, but totally unable to do that. The one time the vehicle spun around, it came back onto the road, it actually took the rear view or the side mirror off the driver's side door of the van that was in front of me. So it connected with that van, spun back off onto the side of the road into the gravel, and then it came back onto the road. And I'm just sitting there in my truck, parked, waiting. There was nowhere for me to go. I was still kind of in town, but outside town. There was no development on the right side of me. It was just open field. So that was the north side, and the wind was blowing severely with the snow and the ice from the north. So I was getting it. My truck was rocking sideways. It's unbelievable, you know, sitting there watching these things. What goes through your mind? And I stopped my vehicle and I knew something horrible was about to happen. I had a feeling I was going to be hit. I had a feeling that this could be the time. And I was not ready. I was not willing to leave this place yet. Split seconds before the impact, I sat and I waited and I watched. I could not tear my eyes away from watching that truck weave back and forth off and on the road. Your eyes are just locked into the terror, even though there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing that you have control over in this situation. You just sit there and you wait. And that time is an eternity. There is no other way to describe it. It was a total eternity waiting for either that truck to slip between me and the vehicle in front of me into the ditch, or to hit me head on. I didn't even think of a third alternative, that maybe, it would just be a slight bump and we would all be fine. But no, it wasn't a slight bump. All I remember, as I'm gripping that steering wheel and I'm clenching my teeth and I'm just screaming, I must have had my nails dug into my hands. It's the only way that I could control or get some semblance of normalcy out of what was occurring, was to grab onto that steering wheel and to hang on for dear life. As I watched the truck go backwards from the other side of the road, backwards in front of me, I knew it was about to happen. I watched. I waited. I screamed inside my head because I don't know why my voice wasn't there. I had no voice. Didn't even try to use it. It didn't even seem like a logical thing to do at the time, but I don't believe that logic played any part in any of this. So as I'm screaming inside my head and watching this vehicle hit the ditch backwards in front of me on my passenger side, all I remember screaming in my head was, I'm never going to see my husband and children again. I couldn't believe the emptiness, the emptiness of not having my children or my husband in my life. That emptiness was soon filled with absolute terror. I saw who was driving the vehicle. It was another woman. Nothing against women drivers. Things happen that are out of our control. Things happen, I think, for a reason. But I watched, I saw her face, and I saw the terror stricken in her face as she was trying again to get control over her pickup truck, and it just did not work. So there I sit, with my hands on the steering wheel, my teeth clenched, my leg pressed so hard into that brake pedal. That brake pedal was going nowhere, trust me. And then I scream in my head, and she hits me. That truck hitting my vehicle was the worst sound I have ever heard in my life. It was a sound I will never, ever forget as long as I live. As I sat in my vehicle after I was hit, I was unable to release my hands from the steering wheel. And the impact was so intense that I was lifted up out of my seat and thrown a little bit forward. Obviously, the seat belts kind of cut you across the shoulder and the chest, and which causes sometimes a lot of bruising and some painful situations to occur. But I was unable to release my hands from the steering wheel. I had flown forward, my legs buckled, my knees hit the dash, and then I was thrown backwards against the seat where my head snapped, or my neck snapped back, and, causes some other interesting injuries. The gentleman that came up to me afterward, he was very kind and he was very helpful. He offered me his information and he asked me if I was okay. And I actually said to him, no, I'm not. I can't feel my legs. The impact was so great that we had a special stereo put into the truck, and it had a cover plate where you flip it down and you can insert your CDs. This was a few years ago, right? So that cover plate actually popped off and ended up in the back seat of the pickup. So everything just got tossed around. My purse went flying. My cell phone landed on the seat beside me, thank goodness, because somehow or another I had to be able to grab my phone to let my husband know what had happened to me. I sat in the truck, not being able to feel my legs, panicking. And then the gentleman that's standing beside me said he smelled gas. And then I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, he smells gas. I can't feel my legs. I can't get out of my truck. What am I supposed to do? Sit here and watch the truck explode around me? Oh my goodness, the fear, the tension, the stress. It's unbelievable what happens to your body. I can't describe it enough. But I was safe, but I was injured. I was very injured this time. And I sat in my vehicle and I waited what seemed like an eternity for the emergency people to show up. I understand there was, a lot of bad weather that day and they needed to get to a lot of other accidents. The person that came up to me after the accident, he had phoned the emergency and the fire crew. And it seemed like 30 minutes had gone by. I called the emergency people wondering where they were, and they were on their way. But it seemed like hours, but it was in total another 5 hours before I got home. I was sent off on a striker board with a neck brace on, with my head taped down to the board, unable to move because of neck and back injuries. I ended up with multiple soft tissue injuries, my third severe whiplash. I had 10 fractured teeth. They weren't even looking at my leg that was stuck on the brake pedal. They weren't even concerned with that. They were more concerned with my neck and back injury. So all the caution was given to those two spots. It took multiple years for all of the injuries to come forth, and they're actually still coming through, and it's 13 years later. But the things that you never forget when you have an experience like this is the fear, the terror that takes over your entire being. There is nothing in your body at that moment in time but terror. You don't know what's going to happen. I thought my life was going well. I was pleased with everything that was going on in my life. And then to have this happen seemed so unfair, seemed so cruel in some ways. But what I look at now, and I look back at this event many times and a couple other events in my life, the near-death experiences in my life, and I know that I've been put on this path, put on this earth for a reason. And I believe that this reason is to tell other people about these experiences, to help other people to understand that they're not alone in all of this. I was a solo individual in a vehicle accident. I had no one to share that experience with. You hear about other people being in multiple car accidents or in plane accidents, and they have other people with them that they can form a bond or develop a bond with over that one event. And it actually helps them to be able to, I think, recover and come to terms with what's happened to them when they have someone else to share that experience with. Now, for me, it was my husband had to share that experience with me. Our boys were grown up. They were out of the house. It was my husband who had to become my caregiver. And that was a horrible thing to have to put on someone when you're an independent individual and you've done everything on your own and you come from, hardworking people that did a lot of physical labor. I did a lot of physical labor when I was young. And I was very healthy and happy, and I did a lot of sports. So I was not weak, in a weakened condition when this accident occurred. I was fit. But it's amazing what these injuries do to you. But it's also amazing what the emotional factor is. So you're dealing with trauma of the initial accident and the leading up towards the accident, where you're just in complete panic mode, in terror mode. Nothing else overrides that. Then all of a sudden, when I was hit, there was this, or briefly before I was hit, there was this feeling of calm again. Where does that come from? Is that coming from the message that we're supposed to receive, that divine intervention is about to happen? That, I was raised Catholic. I have my faith. I believe in God, and I believe that He has me on this earth for a specific reason, and He's put these events in my path to teach me something. And that's how I look at it. That's how I've managed to recover from this all these years later. Yes, I still experience post-traumatic stress. It's not as intense as it used to be. I've learned to deflate the fear when the fear is triggered. Sometimes I'm not always successful. It does happen. But you tell yourself that you're safe. You're okay. Breathe. Nothing's harmed you. You're fine. And if you look at it that way, then it helps you to be able to deal with those stressful times, those panic times when it does bubble up again. So I believe that divine intervention is true. I believe it is real. And I know that because I've experienced it 2 or 3 times in my life, twice through near-death experiences. And I want you to understand that we are given these experiences, I think, for a reason. Whether it be for ourselves, to slow our lives down, to teach us something that we need to learn and experience, or to give us these gifts so that we can teach and relate to other people who have had similar experiences, that are struggling through these events. So when you hear someone say they had, for example, an out-of-body experience during a stressful time like that, I would totally believe that. Because just before I was hit, as I'm screaming inside my head, it felt like I wasn't actually in my physical body. It felt like I was over here. And it's an unusual feeling to almost sit there and hover and watch, but you're actually experiencing it at the same time. I know it sounds unusual, but there's so much more to this than what a lot of people can understand and what a lot of people believe. And I think the more that we can share our experiences around near-death experiences like these and near-death traumas, that the more it will wake up other people to understand what we've gone through. It will help the medical industry to be able to treat us. So what I'd like to leave you with today is these near-death experiences, they are real. They happen to real people like you and I. They can happen in the blink of an eye. Your entire world can be changed, altered, or your entire life could be removed. I was fortunate that I have this opportunity to share my thoughts and my feelings about those experiences that I've had with you today. And what I'd like you to know is that if you have experienced something like this, please talk about it. If you can't talk about it with the average person, go find a therapist that can help you. There's, in a lot of times, post-traumatic stress is quite prominent in these near-death experiences. That in itself needs to be treated. It needs to be taken care of because that will affect you for the rest of your life. You can learn tools and techniques to be able to help deflate the stress of the post-traumatic stress when it kicks up and rears up. They're really good exercises to use. I use them all the time. The sights, the sounds, at times they still affect me, but at times, most of the time now, it's not so bad. It's not like I'm sitting back in that truck, listening for the sirens or hearing the sirens of the fire truck and the ambulance come roaring towards us. That's not what it's like anymore. For me now, it's okay. Yeah, I hear that noise. I'm all right. It's not me. And then you wish whoever, they are racing towards is healthy and happy and all right. Talk about your experiences. Share your experiences. Teach other people about what went on, what happened, what occurred, because it's the only way that we can share our knowledge and our wisdom with the world. We've been gifted these unique experiences. And I want to know why. So for me, it's because I'm here. I'm here. I'm not finished yet because I'm to do this. I am to help other people to get through their situations. And I'm to help other people who have had near-death experiences come out on the other side. Thank you.
I'm Toby Jenkins. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Near-death experiences, from a therapy standpoint, I would categorize as a trauma. Matter of fact, I would go as far as saying it's a complicated and complex trauma. You usually have some type of precipitating event, and that event you typically hear is related to some type of acute health emergency. Think of like heart attacks, strokes, life-saving surgeries, or you also hear them in some type of accidental situation. Commonly, car accidents. That's something a lot of us have in common, driving cars. One of the things that makes it complex and complicated is the universally around the world there's some type of encounter with the supernatural, no matter what your faith tradition is. Christians often talk about seeing God or Jesus or hearing Jesus. People from around the world interact with their Creator in these kind of situations. So that wrestling with mortality is often life-changing. And so from a therapy standpoint, I look at things systemically and would seek to try to get other people involved that the person is in relationship with in the healing process going forward. One of the things that also complicates near-death experiences is if there's an injury of some kind to recover from. Not all near-death experiences result in injury, but those that do offer another layer of complexity in terms of recovering from the incident itself. People who come face to face with their mortality often come out on the other side looking at life very differently. And so from a relationship standpoint, that can be very complicated to deal with your family and loved ones. You commonly hear people who have a new sense of urgency to fulfill a purpose or to engage in some type of activity that they'll leave a mark on the world in. And so that's one reason why it's important to involve other people in the therapy process, because you're essentially dealing with a new person. This person is not the same person that they were before this incident. You sometimes hear of these near-death experiences happening in groups, and when they happen in groups, they can be very bonding. And so one of the things that comes to mind, if you've maybe there's a plane crash of a soccer team in the Andes Mountains several years back. There was a movie made about it. Many of them share that life or death situation. It can become bonding. But as you can imagine, many, probably more often, near-death experiences happen in isolation. And so you have this incredibly moving experience that the people around you have not participated in. And a lot of times when people describe that coming face to face with their mortality or that supernatural part, many people don't believe them. And so that can be even more isolating, or you come off as being crazy, or people just don't believe the experience you had. So from a therapy standpoint, whether there's injury or not, one of the things that has to be dealt with moving forward is desensitization to the triggers that are present from the incident itself. So in the example of Teresa Sims, her event happened during a snowstorm driving her car. So getting in a car when it's snowing is triggering for her. It may make it very difficult for her to then drive in those kind of conditions. Other things that can be triggering are sounds, locations. Of course, we talked about weather conditions, or seeing other people in very similar circumstances, especially if they don't make it out of the incident. So another reason why getting people you're in close contact with included into the therapy is because once you've had this kind of trauma, similar to other traumas, the goal of therapy isn't necessarily to make you forget about the trauma or heal you from the trauma. The goal is really to help you move on in a productive way, incorporating that trauma into a healthy lifestyle and healthy relationships.
So a long time ago, when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, I was watching a movie called Breaker Morant. It's a fantastic film. It's timeless. I recommend it to anyone. It's a brilliant movie, and it's all about the Boer War. And there's a scene in which two of the characters are walking past a row of dead bodies. And the one character says to the other, "Funny thing about the dead, now they're dead." And I remember it just struck me. I just got chills this very moment thinking about that experience, because it just rang this bell in my head that has never stopped ringing. I just thought to myself, wow, that's pretty intense. Well, many years later, I guess about a decade later, I was in college and I was reading a philosophy book called Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus by Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was one of my favorite philosophers. And there's a point where he gets to that, again, just blew my mind and basically captured the essence of what I heard in the film Breaker Morant. And what it said was, it was section 6.4311. He writes, "Death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death." I was like, wow. And then he goes on to say something like, if we take eternity to mean not infinite temporal duration, but timelessness, then eternal life belongs to those in the present. He goes on to say something like, our lives have no end in the same way that our visual field has no limits, meaning you can't see what you can't see, but everything you do see in your purview and your worldview, well, that's what your eyes take in. And so that's like your life, what you can see. And this got me thinking for years and years. I still think to this day. And I can relate this to near-death experiences, all about what happens when you die. So you could take a couple perspectives, do some scenario modeling. Let's say that there is an afterlife, or let's say there is not an afterlife. Either way, in my opinion, it's the same story. But in this case, let's pretend that there is not an afterlife per se, as we become to know it over the years. So what's happening with a near-death experience? You see a light, your life passes before your eyes. That's one thing you hear about all the time. It's very, very common. Your life passes before your eyes. Well, I've had one experience where you could say it was kind of like that, and I do recall something just like that happening. But there is a theory that I put together when I was a kid that I still stand by today, which is that when your body knows and your mind knows that you're going to die, or at least thinks that it knows you're going to die, you will review your whole life, and that's your life passing before your eyes. And then you will judge yourself. It's the final judgment for you by you. And to me, that's like an eternity. So if you don't live to experience death, and there is no actual afterlife, what that means is those final moments in your mind for you are your afterlife, because they'll go on for eternity, your own eternity. So if you led a good life, if you're happy, that's like heaven. If you led a bad life and you're not happy, well, that's not like heaven. That's like something very different. And so I think it's a very real thing, these near-death experiences. And I think people do go through the process of judging themselves, and they have a sort of awakening, if you will, because they become extremely aware of their own judgment about themselves and about their lives. And so I've always taken that as a way to really appreciate this life, this moment, every moment that you have, and be yourself and be okay with that. If you're unhappy, change something for sure, because happiness is the ultimate metric. But I'm pretty sure that's what is going on with near-death experiences, because the mind thinks it's over, and you go through everything you experienced in your life, every major point in your life, everything that was important to you will pass before you. And then if you do live, well, God bless you. That's fantastic. You get a second chance. So when it comes to the science behind determining if someone has, in fact, experienced a near-death type scenario, there are many, many things that doctors can look for, and scientists as well. But I will point out that science is not really perfect. And this is a really significant misconception in our society today, I believe. You hear people say, follow the science or listen to the scientists. Well, science can say different things. We have disagreements about the facts that are absorbed by science and used to develop theories and so forth. We're not even sure about particle or wave theory. Is light particles or is light waves? Because waves really shouldn't bend to gravity according to our current theories. And light does bend to gravity, and yet light has the characteristics of waves. So it's hard to say exactly what's going on, but you can certainly test for certain levels in your bloodstream. For example, there are certain things that doctors can look for to determine if there was a significant event that we can call a near-death experience. But in general, I don't think that's so much of a fantastic concern, because if someone had a near-death experience, then they know. They're going to know. Maybe some people don't believe them, but I really wouldn't worry too much about whether or not you can prove that somebody had a near-death experience, because again, either they're lying or they're telling the truth. But either way, if they had one, they sure know that they had one, and it's a very real thing.